What a place to hide a body. Somebody somewhere is going to catch this if I make a mistake. And I do. No, there were no raccoons in England at that time. He turned his monks into oxen. My goal is to give my readers a you are there experience.
So welcome to this interview. I'm going to be interviewing Donna Fletcher Crow. My name's Andrew Knowles, part of the Regency history team. And these interviews that we're doing with authors are very much about research into the historical fiction or indeed non-fiction books that they write. And it's a pleasure to have Donna with us today. Thank you for joining us, Donna. Donna, where are you exactly?
Thank you, Andrew. It's lovely to be with you in England today, because I'm way off in the up in the northwest corner of the United States in Idaho.
Okay. I have a rough idea of where that is.
About 5,000 miles away, right under Canada.
Donna's written over or about 50 books. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. I'd like to say I started as a child. I really didn't, but I started in the early 80s when actually we had our three sons, and I wanted to have another child. I wanted a daughter, but it wasn't happening, and I needed something to do. So, and I didn't want to go back to school teaching. So I started writing because I got a story in my head, and actually the one Brandley Search, which is a well, I call it a Regency novel. He was actually George IV by then, but you know that counts in the Regency period. It came from reading a Georgette Heyer novel, and I wanted to develop one of her minor characters, which today would probably be called fan fiction. But then I took it so far away from it. That was just the springboard. I didn't stay with her characters. So anyway, that's how I got started.
Brilliant. I mean, we take a fairly loose view on the term Regency because the Regency itself was just 9 years, 1811 through to 1820. But the whole Regency era, the era of the second half of George III's reign and into George IV. We count that. When we're talking about historical research, I'm happy to go much wider than that as well, because of course history is like everything from now backwards is history, isn't it?
That's right. Absolutely.
So your website says that your books are, and I can vouch for this because I've read one of them myself, your books are meticulously researched, entertaining novels of romance, history and mystery, and an engaging you are there style that lets you live the history. And I would absolutely agree that they drip history. I mean, you cannot avoid the history. It's there on every single page, which is great. And you've written, as I said, 50 books, and you've written, you've got books around about Glastonbury, and the Monastery Murders is a series. Well, do you mind what are some of the others that you've written?
I have 3 mystery series, as you mentioned, the Monastery Murders, and then the Elizabeth and Richard series. They are literary suspense, and those are where my Jane Austen titles fit in. And then I have the Lord Danvers Investigates, which is Victorian true crime. And then besides the mystery novels, I have the series of the Where There Is Love, which was the original. They're now the redos of these. Are just a couple of them. There's 6 books in the series. The original, the redos of the ones that I first started with. And I've got lots more. Those are the ones I can think of.
I mean, that's a fascinating.
I know what else.
Go on then.
The Celtic Cross series, which they were originally epics the size of Glastonbury, which is more than 800 pages. Wow. I was very influenced by Michener at that time, who wrote these sweeping sagas, and I wanted to do that. So for the Celtic Cross, I started with the history, the spiritual history of Scotland, and for 4 books, and then moved over to Ireland for 6 books.
So, I mean, that's a huge time span that you just described there, if I've heard that correctly, you know, back from the Celtic right through to Victorian. So give us a sense of what's the sort of earliest time period you cover, and what's the latest time period that you cover?
Well, Glastonbury starts with the birth of Christ. We have the Druids standing atop Glastonbury Tor. And of course, the Druids did study the stars, and they see the Star of Bethlehem and know from their background that it precursors the birth of a great king, which is of course just like the Magi understood. And so that book then goes on through English Christian history, through the dissolution of the monasteries. And then I like to say that my Celtic Cross series goes on into the future, because it ends with a vision of real peace in Ireland. And we're getting close. They're doing a great deal better, but there's still a way to go. And I end with a vision of that. My Richard and Elizabeth series, as I mentioned, the literary suspense, they are contemporary murder mysteries.
Wow, I mean, so it's a vast range, and you're literally covering the last 2,000 years, if you're starting with the birth of Christ and coming up to contemporary, and as you said, looking into the future. When you're writing a story, or you feel inspired to write a story, what comes first? Is it the plot, or is it that you've been doing some research and that's, you know, fired an idea and think, actually I could turn this into a fantastic novel?
It's the people and the places. No, plot is the last thing, and for me by far the hardest, which is one reason I started writing mysteries, was to force myself to do more work on plot, because I love the places. That's very important to me. And then the people, what these characters did. I shouldn't really say characters, they become characters in my books, but I always try to start with real people, and their stories inspire me. And I often find when I'm researching one book, then I find the story to the next character, and I say, oh, you know, I'd like to write know more about that person and what they did. And it just sort of carries me on.
So it's characters and places that really drive your imagination.
It is, yes.
That's great. And of that vast time span, have you got a particular, is there a favorite era that you like to write in?
Well, I would say whichever one I'm working on at the moment. and that really is pretty much the case. Although, well, my first great literary love was King Arthur. And that is what led to, because Glastonbury is an Arthurian Grail search as well. But then when I was just a little bit older, I met Jane Austen. And I've never really looked back from Jane Austen, and then the other, the English classics. So I go on through the Victorian writers as well as my favorites, but Jane and the Regency stand apart in my reading.
So you've read a lot in terms of the classics. It sounds like you've read Jane Austen, you've read Bronte, Shakespeare.
Oh yeah. Well, I was an only child living on a farm, and my mother was not well, and so I had to entertain myself. I did have a horse, but other than that, it was books, and that's the way I grew up. Then I was an English major at university, and then went on to become an English teacher. And it's a wonderful background for a writer, because if you're going to be a fiction writer, you really do need to know the classics. And people who come to writing through journalism or many, many other wonderful fields, really anything can lead you to it.
Yeah.
But if you don't have this background, then you have to play catch up. and I came, already prepared in that area. Then there's other areas I have to catch up in.
So historical accuracy is what you're known for, and as I say, like, I've
Thank
read one of your
you.
books recently, and it literally is dripping with historical facts. How important do you think history is to the reader?
Well, fortunately, it's important to my readers. That's a self-selecting thing. And people who don't like history, I'm afraid they won't read my novels. But we all have our own audiences. I think that's one thing. We always have an ideal reader, sort of sitting on our shoulder, reading as we write. And I write for the person who knows the most about my period, because that keeps me honest. I know then that, oh, somebody somewhere is going to catch this if I make a mistake, and I do. We're all human, and my books are thoroughly edited by English writers, English editors, because my books being set in England, I need that backup. But even then, I'll get a note from a reader and I'll think, oh, help us, they're right on that. How could I have done that?
We'll come back to that, because that's one of my questions for later on about slipping up with history, because we all do it, however thorough we try to be. But what's your favorite approach to historical research?
Well, as I think you mentioned in what you read from my website, and thank you for that. My goal is to give my readers a you are there experience. And in order to do that, I have to be there myself first. And I like to go to a place and try to put my feet down in that time, get into my character's head and think, what would they have been seeing? And sometimes if you're off somewhere in the Scottish Highlands, there's not much difference. Not much is going to have changed in some cases. But if you're in London, it's going to be a great deal different than what a Regency character would have encountered. But I try then to see things through their eyes, and then come back and sort of relive all of that at my desk while I'm writing the story. I should back up, though, and say that before I do any of that, I have to have my story fairly well outlined, because for me, we talked earlier, I'm, I don't know, 5,000, how many miles away, and my books are set in England. This is going to mean a research trip, which is time consuming and expensive. And if I don't get what I need when I'm there, then when I'm back home, I can't just hop on a plane and go back. So I have to have my story pretty well outlined, and I have to have done all of the reading, the background, get everything out of a book that I can first. And of course, through the first 30 years of, 20 some years of my writing, anyway, before the internet, that was entirely interlibrary loan. And I still rely quite a bit on that. I still think you can get more out of printed books, but at least we do have the backup of getting things online as well now. But then when I have that done and I know what I need to know, where I think I can find that information, who I might need to interview, or which museums I need to go to, whatever, then I set up my research trip. And so that's pretty generally my approach. I'm going to say, though, knowing your story ahead and thinking you know what you need to know, particularly at first, I try to do better now. I would so focus on what I thought I needed that I would sometimes shut out other things that happened or that people would say. And I'd think, oh, well, that's interesting, but that wasn't what I asked you. I didn't say that to them, but this is what I'm thinking. So I didn't write it down. Well, then sometimes I would get home and I'd find, oh, I did need that. Oh, what did they say? What were they trying to show me? So bottom line, keep an open mind. And I have found that often the setting will suggest really valuable plot elements. Like in one of my, I think it's the second one of my monastery murders. Anyway, one of the earlier ones in the monastery murders. I was in the Norfolk Broads, going to an old monastery that has just pretty much subsided into the earth. That was really why it crumbled away. It's a wonderful, fascinating place. Oh, the atmosphere was great. And there was an ancient mill built in the center of what had been the monastery's gatehouse. And I was in that, the walls going up like this, and then a big hole at the top, and I realized, and of course a dirt floor. I thought, oh, what a place to hide a body. And that's something, there's no way you could get that other than being there. And if I hadn't been open to it, I wouldn't have allowed myself to develop that. And so that's an example how really being there can change a book.
Wow. So how many trips have you made across to the UK?
I don't know.
You've lost count.
I used to get maybe 3 books out of one trip.
Right.
Because again, time consuming, expensive, had to leave my family, all the arrangements. And the arrangements were much harder to make at that time. This was even before the fax machine. And it would take a month at least to set up an interview, maybe 3 months to arrange the trip, because everything had to go by post, and then they had to reply, and then I had to reply back. And now I can do it much more quickly. Well, then my daughter in 2002 married an Englishman. And then I was going back and forth as often as I could to see my daughter and her family. And sometimes I would make 3 trips for one book. I sort of reversed the order. Now they're in Canada, so it's, we're back to maybe one book per trip.
Yeah. So you've certainly been across the Atlantic many times by the sounds of it.
I love it. Yes.
Yeah. And so the way you're describing your process then is you really think through the story and the plot and how you want it to come together, and then you think about where are the locations. And you talked about interviewing. So I'm guessing you're meeting people and talking to them, and then actually coming across here and doing that.
Yes, that's right.
That's how it works.
Oh, and I had some wonderful people. One of the things I love telling the story of are movements of the Holy Spirit at times of religious renewal, spiritual renewal. And there was a great time in the Scottish Highlands, the Hebrides revival, it's called. And I haven't written that book yet, but it's coming. But I was earlier enough in my research, I did that a number of years ago, that the man who was a child at the time, but so much of the prayer meetings and the initial things that happened before the revival happened in his barn. And he took me around and showed me the barn where he lived, where he was as a child, and got to really hear it from an eyewitness. And I think that's really valuable because, of course, when I'm doing old Celtic saints and things, there are no eyewitnesses left to that.
Well, that was my next question. I mean, you talk about eyewitnesses, but with your Victorian books and your Regency books, and obviously the stuff even before that, yes, there are no eyewitnesses. So do you read a lot of primary sources?
I try to, yes, indeed. And libraries, for my research trips, I love to spend time in libraries and get resources that wouldn't be available anywhere else.
Mm.
And librarians are just God's gift to writers, just the most valuable resource you can have. Um, I think of my research in Northern Ireland at the Linen Hall Library, and the wonderful librarian that just kept bringing me these little pamphlets and things that were published at the time I was writing about. And I don't know, they might have the only copies that are left of them. And one of the most well, I don't know, really deeply moving experiences was when I was researching one of what is now the Where There Is Love series, this one that I was showing you earlier. I had made an appointment to go to the home of one of my characters, Granville Dudley Ryder. He was the Earl of Grand. Oh, never mind, I've forgotten the title.
Doesn't matter.
His father was a leader in Parliament. His uncle was a bishop. It was this enormously leading family in spiritual matters and in politics. And I learned somewhere in my reading that they maintained at Sandon Hall, they maintained the muniments room with keeping all the family records. So I made an appointment to go there. I had 2 small children with me at the time, so I made arrangements for a nanny to come take care of them for the day. And in going through everything that the librarian brought out for me, she brought me my character's diary, which is a diary. It was a diary in the English sense, just we would call it a calendar.
Yes.
No, I didn't mean, because Americans use the word diary to mean more like a journal. Yeah. So it was just due dates. But it was interesting to see the appointments he had and everything. But he had stuck a love letter to his heroine. Well, it wasn't really a letter, it was a prayer that he wrote the night before he proposed to her.
Wow.
And I don't know if she ever saw that letter or written prayer. But of course, I copied every word of it out and used it in the book. So you can come across some wonderful things. Yeah. If you can get back that deeply into what is still in existence.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, we do have this web of obviously public libraries and various institutional libraries, but also public records offices, and as you say, private collections as well. And I'm sure there are so many documents that are lurking in these places that are still to be really explored. And yeah, and it's a treasure trove for novelists and historical novelists.
And of course, we all still hoping that more of Jane Austen's letters will show up.
Yes.
And occasionally something does.
Absolutely. Every now and again, something pops up. Someone finds a document, so something that's been reused, or it's just been tucked in the back of another book, and it's sat on a shelf for decades and no one's known it's there. So what would you say was your biggest challenge when it comes to research?
The things that just aren't available. Again, thinking about my research for Glastonbury, which, as I said, starts with the birth of Christ and the Celtic period. Then it's the novelist's job to know as much as you can about the general history of what was really going on in the period and fill fill in the gaps. That's what we have to do if the information simply isn't there. Another challenge is when the information conflicts. And again, this is what you get in telling the stories of saints, for example. And there will be maybe 3 hagiographies written of a saint, and they're told different ways. Well, then it's my job to decide which way I'm going to tell it. And sometimes I handle that by having different characters say, well, I think this, and another one say, well, I read that, or something. You know, sometimes you can get different viewpoints in, but at the end of the day, as a writer, I have to know what I think. And there are a lot of times where I have to decide what's symbolic and what are they trying to say really happened. I think of writing about Saint David in Wales, and one of his hagiographers said that he turned his monks into oxen. Well, did they believe that they're really, that this really happened, or did he make them work as hard as oxen? Is this symbolic? And I even came down to that in Glastonbury. Did Joseph of Arimathea actually take Christ there as a child? Because he was his uncle, and Joseph of Arimathea did travel to the Scilly Isles and to the tin mines. He was a tin trader. So it is conceivably possible. There is some logical evidence that this could have happened. Or did he take Christ with him symbolically when he went back in spreading the faith, because he took him in his heart? Again, the sorting out the symbolism and the fact, and trying to figure out what the fact is. With Glastonbury, what I wound up doing was simply saying, these are its legends, this is its history. And of course, we know that legends are based on history.
Absolutely.
Legends grow from some historical incident. Well, King Arthur himself, we don't know for sure that there was a high king named Arthur, or that did any of the things that that the legends say he did. But someone held off the Saxons that were sacking eastern England. Someone held them off long enough that they could be Christianized, and by the time they got then to Western England and to Wales, then they could work together. So we might as well call him Arthur.
Well, absolutely.
So, this works because someone did, and maybe it was more than one king. Maybe he's a composite.
Yeah.
But we know that this did happen, and so.
Yeah. So when you've decided what's history, and obviously with the more recent times, you know what's history, and obviously, so your books are dripping with history. So you're talking not just about people and places and events, but obviously you're describing clothes, you're describing vehicles, you're describing all sorts of things that are day-to-day objects and things that come up in your history. Where do you decide? How do you decide to weave history in, and where do you, because obviously there's a borderline between it becoming a history book versus a novel. How do you define that border?
Well, for part of it, I rely on my editors. I've gone over the top because I do love the historical detail, but I think the key in writing is to do it in viewpoint, stay in your character's head, and then there can just be a reference here or there to what what they are wearing or what they're experiencing. I think of one moment that was really fun in where love illumines, again in the Where There Is Love series. My heroine is a fiery lady, and by the way, her family, her descendants, sent me a book about their family and sent me some information. I was very privileged in the research on that one. But it was at the time when the women were wearing the panniers, the really wide skirts under their dresses, the wide dresses. And so she's disgusted with the hero, and she storms out of the room and sticks in the doorway because her panniers won't go through. And so that's just a way of bringing in the period detail. So it's developing her personality as well as the clothing. And so
absolutely,
we have that.
So let's come back to the subject of accuracy. What would you say was your biggest historical error? Are you happy to admit that?
Let me think.
Is there anything that stands out or was amusing? I was talking to an author a while back who admitted that one of her biggest errors was the fact that she'd actually placed a North American mammal in the English countryside, and of course she hadn't realized that that particular animal didn't roam free in England at that time. Still doesn't.
Yes, I did that. I did that in Glastonbury. I had my druids sacrificing, and I can't remember now what it was. Maybe a raccoon.
Oh, right.
Something,
yes.
Something that a reader caught and said, no, there were no raccoons in England at that time, or whatever it was. I may have that one. Yeah. That was a couple of editions back, so I have had the chance to change that.
To correct
another one that was fortunately just in a blog, but it was about some recipe or some cooking in the related to Jane Austen, and I made a reference to Martha Lloyd doing the cooking at Chawton House, and sent the blog to the lady who has Julianne Gear, who has written a wonderful Regency cookbook. She studied all of Martha Lloyd's recipes, cooked them all, and that's all published by Clarendon Press or Oxford University Press, whatever. Anyway, it's a very prestigious book. So I sent it to her because I had met her at a Jane Austen conference. And she wrote back and said, well, your blog was really interesting, and thank you for referencing my book. But Martha Lloyd did not do the cooking. She was a genteel lady. She oversaw the kitchen, but the Austens hired cooks. I knew that. I had read the letters where they even talk about the cooks. I had read Julianne Gear's book, where she makes the point, but because it is so often said in Austen circles about Martha Lloyd cooking, and she did have her recipe book, but the cooks did most of the work. Those things slip in. Being a blog, I could change that, but
that's easier. It's
worse
easier
if it gets in a book.
So, I mean, thinking about the fact that other authors may be watching this and interested to know about the history side of things, and particularly, how do you handle the fact that, because you've already described the fact that some of your readers will get in touch to tell you that something wasn't quite right. How do you handle that?
Oh, well, I always thank them for it, because that means they were reading carefully, and a careful reader in today's world where everybody scrolls through everything, that's a very valuable thing. So I appreciate what they've done, and that they've taken time to write to me. And then as soon as I can, of course, if it's something like a blog, I change it instantly. But if it's in a book, then I have to wait for, the next edition. Ebooks you can update, but it's a little harder with print books. But I do try to, if I think it's something really serious, I try to correct it.
Yeah. And with your depth of knowledge, do you ever encounter mistakes in other people's books? And if you do,
Oh,
how do you
yes.
how do you
All the
handle
time.
that? How do you handle
Oh,
that?
well, if it's just something little, I just laugh and think, oh, yeah, we all do it. If it's something that I really consider egregious, I quit reading because then I can't trust the author.
So it's been great to talk to you, and thank you very much for sharing. Finally, just again thinking about those other authors who may be watching this, what would your tips be to somebody who's either thinking of starting, writing historical fiction, or is already into it? What would your tips be to that? You've obviously got years and years of experience, which is fantastic. What would your
Well,
tips be?
whether it's history or whatever it is, I have two bits of advice I always give to beginning writers, and one is write from your passion. Whatever just really turns you on, then go for it. Don't worry about the market, because the markets change, and if you are really excited about something, there'll be somebody out there, someone else who will. And then the other thing I've already alluded to is read the classics. And whatever is, in my case, it's English literature and English history, but whatever your field is, read the classic documents.
Yeah, immerse yourself in that period by reading the words of people who wrote it at that time.
Yes. For history, novels written at that time, and then of course the letters, Jane Austen's letters, for example, just invaluable.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing some of your experience and some of your tips and your thoughts, Donna. It's been fantastic to talk to you. So where can people find you these days, other than on bookshelves, obviously, and in libraries? Where can people find you online?
DonnaFletcherCrow.com. It's very easy. And I'm on Facebook. I am on Twitter, but I don't do much. That doesn't work so well for me. And of course, Amazon. I have an author page on Amazon. All of my books are available there worldwide. Anyone look me up, and you can write to me through my website if you would like to do that.
Brilliant. So there's an invitation to get in touch with Donna.
Oh, yeah.
and to tap a little bit further into her considerable experience.
I will just mention too that on my website I do offer a free book. It's one of the Lord Danvers books. If you're interested in looking at how I handle history and weave fictional stories around true stories, that might be a good place to start, and it's free.
Absolutely, and I've downloaded that one and I have read it.
Oh, good.
So it was a good book. It was and again, dripping with historical facts. Although I did have a question about the balloon.
Okay.
And balloon travel. How much balloon travel did they really do back then?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And that was one of my fun experiences. I had to go up in a balloon before I could write about it. So I found it's hot air now, not helium. So the experience is a little bit different.
Yeah.
But I got the feeling that another fun one I had was for a book I was writing was to go snorkeling. So, and another one was to go caving, to rappel into a cave. So, my research has taken me to things I would never do in real life. But if I have to do it for a book, then I'll do it.
So there's a tip. So if you want to take up some extreme sports, then you can use writing as an excuse, because it's all research.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, it's a great excuse. Oh well, I really have to go to this distant Hebrides island. It's going to take me 2 days off the coast of England or Scotland. I'm so sorry. I'll see you all later.
That's fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Donna. So thank you very much for your time. And it's still early in your day over there. So have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. And you have a lovely evening. It's been so much fun to visit. Thank you, Andrew.